Welcome back to the K-Enable Fitness Podcast. This is going to be episode 2 about common biomechanical issues with people who have visual impairment. Allow me to reintroduce myself. I am Evan Swibrock, and I have my bachelor's in health science, master's in kinesiology, certified strength conditioning specialist, have been an adjunct professor at college teaching exercise physiology and trainers, and then am currently a strength coach with the Army right now. I also happen to be visually impaired after I was diagnosed with Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy back in 2014. So hopefully you know now that I'm not just a bum who's going to be trying to use some big words and instead have a bit of background in this stuff. So today's going to get a little bit sciencey, but don't worry, I'm going to break it down and we're going to talk about a lot of different things that happen in the body when you have a visual impairment. There's a lot of compensations that have to happen because us humans are just beautiful, wonderful, adaptive beings, but some of those adaptations in order to make up for our visual impairment are going to lead us to some other issues. And we're going to talk about what those issues tend to be and then how to actually fix them, because there's a lot we can still do. So in that vein, I want to start out with, let's kind of go from the top down. We're going to start by talking about the neck. So what happens a lot of times with us with visual impairments, especially if we're just low vision, is we're going to be peeking at our phone, trying to look in at a computer, everything like that, kind of even like bring our face closer to noises. All of these things are going to lead us to what's called a protracted neck position. And think about if you're jutting your chin forward, that's going to be what's called protraction. And doing the opposite, where you take the back of your head back behind you and almost give yourself a little double chin while trying to keep your face level, that's going to be called a retraction. And what we're actually going to be able to do is use retraction in order to make up for all the protraction. So what happens a lot of times is there's this bit of a chin jut, okay, that protraction that happens a lot of times, again, when we're leaning into things all the time, if it's really hard to see stuff. Or I've noticed with a lot of the totally blind people that I've worked with, they don't care so much about making good eye contact, so they're not keeping their face level. It's just kind of, they get to plop down more towards what would be fetal position, where everything is flexing in the front and the extensors in the back are a little bit more drawn out. So everything's gonna be kind of trying to round almost towards the belly button. And the neck doing that is gonna lead that chin to drop and the head to jut forward. So these things can cause a lot of issues, especially if our chin is just jutting forward. You're going to feel the very top of your neck, where those muscles connect up there, tends to get really, really tight. And that's at the top 2 cervical vertebrae is what they're called. It's going to be C1, C2. Those can get very, very tight and cause these issues that can even lead to like headaches, even glute instability. There's a lot of things that can be really wonky when our neck is not in great alignment. So how can we fix this neck issue? We can do so by doing, like I said earlier, the opposite of this protraction and instead use retraction. We're able to keep that face nice and level and then take our head backward. So you can even practice that right now, where you try to keep like some neutral posture, face facing straight forward, not letting your chin tilt up or down, and instead take that face backwards. Almost like we're trying to take, I think about a wall behind you and you're trying to just boop the back of your head towards that. In that vein, if you're not very good at feeling that in open space, we can actually use an actual wall, where you're going to lean against the wall, try to put as much of your back as you can against it, leave your feet out the front if you want to, especially if that lower back is opening up too much. Kind of find a nice tall posture, and then you can take that chin and even put your second and third fingers on it and push straight back a little bit to help you get that directionality. And then once we're making contact with the wall behind us, then we're actually going to be able to double check if our chin is jutting up or down or anything like that, because you're going to notice that friction. It's going to be pulling on the back of your head and your hair. So if we're able to do that good retraction, it should just feel like solid instant contact as opposed to sliding up and down. That's going to tell you that that chin is running loose a little bit. This, lying down on your back and doing the same thing, doing it into your pillow at night, things like that are all going to be ways of double checking this neck retraction, and then trying to do that 10 to 20 times once in a while, especially when you notice you're sitting or you're in bad posture or something, doing that actual eccentric concentric motion where we're able to let it go into a bad posture or just a lazy posture and then bring it back through that good control, that's going to be able to start building up these postural muscles and keep your neck in alignment and start normalizing that as well. That can be thought of as like, oh, I don't really care, I'm totally blind, or I have really low vision, it doesn't matter to me to look people in the eye. But the issue then becomes you're going to have a lot of nerve issues that are going to be stemming from that. If you start getting like tingling in your fingers, it trailing down your shoulder, things like that, those can be big indications of cervical nerve issues. And that's going to be from these cruddy postures and these muscles being turned on or stretched or contracted when they are not supposed to be. So this healthier neck posture isn't just to be trying to be all fancy at a dinner party or something. Instead, it is going to be really helpful for you to be able to function properly down the line. Let's think about if we're using a white cane and then we're trying to get around and be able to feel the ground and everything. If we're having nerve issues going down into any part of our hand, it's going to cause a lot of issues for us actually being able to get feedback and understand the world around us in time. So these neck issues are absolutely critical to keep working on, so make sure you're hitting those retractions. Next is going to be shoulders. We're going to have the same thing with protraction and retraction here, and it's actually going to require the same nomenclature of movements as well. So if we think about the shoulders, rounding out the front, right, almost like your shoulders are trying to cave in your chest, and maybe we're rounding over a little bit there as well, and they're not just coming forward, but our upper back is actually rounding down as well. We have this slumped over posture. That's going to lead to what's called a thoracic spine, and it's below the neck and above the low back. That's the thoracic spine area. Think of that as kind of that connector between the neck and the low back, and if this isn't in good alignment, it's going to cause the neck to have to compensate and the low back to have to compensate. So it can often be the cause of a lot of these issues. So this good shoulder posture and upper back posture is going to be paramount for making sure that you're able to keep everything from getting punished up or down the chain as well. So like we talked about retractions, our shoulder and scapular retractions are going to be a little bit different. Imagine that we have a piece of wood in between our shoulder blades right there on the spine, and you're going to try to reach your shoulders around the corner, squeeze the upper back together, opening up that big proud chest, and try to squeeze that piece of wood so you can crush it into sawdust. That is going to be our retraction here. So go ahead, try doing like 5 of those in a row, holding for like a 2 count pause with that big squeeze around the back. I even kind of let my elbows go around as well, almost act like I'm pulling something to me. And then that's going to be a nice little preset. So after you hit just 5 of those with a little bit of a pause, you're going to notice, hey, I'm sitting up taller. I'm able to have a big proud chest, and I'm not feeling so slumped over, and those postural muscles are a little bit more turned on. The more and more and more we can get these things activated and strong and not just spread out and stretched along our back because we're rounded over all the time, the better off we're going to be. I used to work at a chiropractic clinic for about 4 years, and we would have a lot of older people who would get into their 80s, and then it would be rounded for so many years that it was just impossible to get them to open back up and enjoy the quality of life that comes with that appropriate posture. So I don't want you to get behind the 8 ball on this. Instead, make sure we're doing those good shoulder retractions. Try, again, just like the neck retractions, 10 to 20 of those. Again, ensuring that squeeze, that's kind of what that pause is for, and then being able to go from there. Let's keep moving our way down, and what we're going to talk about now is a little bit of a complex thing, but you'll be able to understand it by the end. This is called lower cross syndrome, and it sounds fancy, but don't worry, we're going to break it down. Lower cross syndrome is basically an amalgam of a few different symptoms that tend to cause issues, and it's all going to be about the pelvis. Okay, think about your pelvis as a bowl, and if it's full of water, if it tips out the front, it's going to be spilling water out, and if it tips water way out the back, which is less common, it's called posterior pelvic tilt, then it's going to be spilling water out the back. And out the front, it's going to be called anterior pelvic tilt. Anterior just meaning front. What we want is our bowl, our pelvis, to be nice and level. And when we think about all the muscles and everything that have to move around that pelvis and connect to it, those need to be in really great balance and alignment, not too stretched, not too tight. What happens in lower cross syndrome is we're going to have our hip flexor muscles, right, which are going to be able to pull those like knees to your chest, overactive and over-shortened. Let's think, more than likely you're sitting right now. If we're sitting, our knee is closer to our chest, so those muscles that perform that are going to be shortened and getting tight. And they're also not really getting work, so they're going to start compensating by trying to just be tight in this position because they think, oh, this is where I need to be because I'm sitting for 13 hours a day. And it's going to start becoming that normal for them. On the upper side of that is going to be your lower abdominals. So those lower abs are supposed to be able to help pull that pelvis into alignment and make sure that water isn't spilling out the front, but they're going to be pulled open so much because those hip flexor muscles below them are going to be hanging on for dear life. So those low abs are getting stretched out, okay? So you have low abs getting stretched out because the hip flexors are so tight and getting shortened. Now on the back side, we're going to have a slightly different issue. When that pelvis is pulling forward, we want to think about what's above that pelvis. That's going to be our low back. And that's going to start getting tighter as the back of that pelvis, we think about that top rim of our bowl, is starting to tilt up because it's spilling water out the front. That is then going to make our low back really tight. And then below that point is where our hamstrings and our glutes activate and are able to attach to that pelvis as well. So that's an issue because with that low back getting tighter and that bowl tilting forward, then those hamstrings and glutes really get strung out, and our glutes aren't able to activate very well. Even though they're so powerful, they're going to be slightly turned off, if not completely, like having pretty much what's called glute amnesia sometimes, where it's like they forget how to even turn on, and it's a really big problem. So even those powerful muscles kind of forget, and then it's going to allow that pelvis to keep tilting out the front, and those hamstrings are going to get pulled along, kind of like some tight piano chord, along for the ride against their will as well. So we got a tight low back because it's getting contracted. We have some tight hamstrings because they're getting pulled apart, and then we're going to have some really tight low abs because they're being stretched apart, and again, tight hip flexor muscles because they're being compressed together like crazy and hanging on for dear life. So how do we fix this? First and foremost, make sure that we're standing more of the day and not sitting all the darn time. The more that we're in this flex position where our knees are closer and closer to our chest, the tougher it's going to be able to make up for this. We can't have a couple minutes of stretching and then be able to just hop back on the couch, sitting down, slumped over, all over again, and hope that that would be good enough. So there's a lot of different stretches, a lot of different approaches to this, but what I would focus on is being able to stretch the front of the hip. We can do a nice long lunge position, making sure we have the right amount of support so the brain really trusts that position. So what I like is having people stand next to a wall, go into a long lunge position where the back leg, let's say our right leg in this case, is going to be nice and locked out, just anchoring ourselves on the ball of that foot, reaching really long and trying to get that knee, ankle, hip all in alignment. Our chest is going to stay nice and tall, facing the wall, and we're going to have our hands on the wall for a little bit of support as well. So you notice that left leg is going to have to hold a lot of support as the right leg just kicks out the back and is going to be getting a nice stretch on the front of that hip. Go ahead and hold that, even double check that you can squeeze your glutes there to make sure they're starting to wake up and understand, hey, just because the front of my hip was tight doesn't mean I can't still do my job. A few sets of 30 seconds or even longer there is a really great start. That's going to start turning off that front of that hip and lessening how much that bowl is tilting forward. And then we would go into a little bit of the glute activation. And again, we're keeping this nice and simple for today. We could get way fancier, but this is going to be a really great start for all of you. So second activation exercises is going to be a glute bridge where we're going to be on our back and you're going to pull your heels as close to your butt as you can. You're probably going to feel a bit of a stretch in the knees, up in the quads, even in that high hip again. And then you're going to stomp through the ground, leaving your shoulders down and then trying to create a straight line from your knees down to your hip, down to your shoulder. So a nice tight core is imperative throughout all of this. It's also going to start turning on those low abs a little bit better as well. Be able to get your hips through, squeeze the butt, and then bend at the hips again to lower them back down until your whole back is flat again onto the ground. So holding that at the top for about 5 seconds or so is a really great way to double check and then start normalizing these positions. And especially if you feel really tight in the front of that hip there, probably means that you need it even more. So 10 to 20 reps of that. Start on the lower side, start getting conditioned to that, or just break it up and do sets of 5 until you're at 20. All you gotta do is lie there in between. And then that's gonna be a really great glute activation exercise to start out and start solving this lower cross syndrome. Okay, next is going to be some short stepping issues. So I noticed, especially myself, once I started in walking in some more unfamiliar territory with my cane, or having to worry about like weather and different things like that. I live in Alaska now, so it's always a concern of there being ice coming up and being prepared to not stride out too much and have too small of a base of support and not fall on my face or anything. So you wind up short stepping a lot as a blind person. This is going to lead to a lot of issues at the feet that we're going to discuss in a bit, and up high in the hip, where we're going to be, again, very knee dominant, quad dominant, and having to use those hip flexors a lot to hang on for dear life. There's also going to be one of those quad muscles called the rectus femoris. It's kind of that teardrop. It goes, it's going to be straight down the middle if you're feeling the top of your quads. That can actually start acting as a false hip flexor as well, because it's just, again, different things trying to compensate and hang on for dear life. So short stepping can be helpful for us being able to traverse the world, but we want to kind of shift those steps to being a little bit longer by kicking out the back a little bit. That's going to start activating that big toe, activating the glute, and then getting your foot to be able to go into what's called supination, where we actually use the arch of that foot in order to activate a little bit as well. A lot of people think about if their foot gets flat when they're contacting the ground, but that's not so much a concern if we're able to have it go from what's called pronation, where that arch is flatter, into that arch being able to raise up, and all the really, really cool, intricate things that happen at the foot then, to be able to come into supination, flexing that arch, having a strong foot, and then getting that little flick out the back with the big toe, which again really, really helps the glutes to turn on, and it's then going to help you to have better, stronger steps, and then a lot better hip mechanics as well. So even though we're short stepping, we don't want to just kind of stomp out the front. We want to make sure that we kind of get a bit more kick out the back as our propulsion, and you're still going to have a foot in front of you to be able to hit the brakes whenever necessary. It's this kind of weirdly nuanced at times, but I've had some clients where it hurt them to walk because the front of their hip was just pulling them into these weird stomps all the time. But then once they get used to kind of just getting that little extra tenth of a second of kick out the back with that big toe, then all of a sudden they're able to walk faster if they want. They're able to still be able to keep themselves safe by not taking too long of steps, but they're also going to be able to have a lot more limited pain, because the front of that hip doesn't get to dominate nearly as much anymore, and we're going to be able to stay nice and upright and then be able to accommodate to our environment really quickly as well. Not to mention, instead of just acquiring, let's say, 5,000 steps throughout the day that are making the front of our hip even more and more and more dominant, instead we're going to be able to have those glutes start to activate more and find a much happier balance with all those different reps. Because we want you to get out there, moving around, having fun, enjoying your life. But if those steps are constantly making everything a little bit worse, that would really suck for us. So we really want that to be able to be the opposite, where this movement is not just restorative mentally, but also physically able to get us in a much better place without even having to really think about it too much. Once that little bit of a flick out the back becomes a habit, and we use even the same length of stride, but just shift really where it is, then that's going to be really beneficial for you as well. Last thing is going to be flat feet. So we talked about this a little bit with how that foot interacts with the ground, and I could talk all day about that, absolutely. But what we can do is just make sure our foot is strong enough in order to make sure it's not just flat all the time. We need it to be able to compensate while we're going through that stepping motion during gait, in order to be able to flex that arch and again have those capacities to activate the glute, have all these wonderful things happen just by contacting the ground. So what we can do is called a short foot activation exercise. You can do the standing or sitting in order to get a good feel for it, but then standing is going to be optimal, and being able to practice this motion during squats, lunges, even making sure it's happening if you're a jogger or even walking in a safe place where you're able to go a little bit faster. This is going to be huge to be able to hit this position. The short foot is going to be where we're going to have our feet flat on the ground. Okay, so I'm just sitting in a chair right now, and I have my feet just kicked underneath me. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take the base of the big toe, not the big toe itself, but where it comes out of the foot. Think about that big nub right there, the base of that big toe. We're going to drag that back towards our heel. Okay, so you're going to notice it's going to be a nice long line when our foot is really flat, where it's almost a straight line from the heel all the way through the arch to the base of that big toe. But now we're going to flex that base of that big toe towards the heel, and notice it's going to create that arch. It's going to be a little bit of an arcing rainbow for us that's going to be able to flex, and you're going to notice it if you can especially squeeze it really hard and you're getting a good feel for that, it's going to start fatiguing you pretty darn quick. So what I would do is practice this and practice 10 seconds on, 10 seconds off for several reps in order to start building up that short foot position. And again, remember, seated is one thing. Standing is way more applicable, though, to us in our everyday life. That's going to start building that strength, that capacity, and that kinesthetic awareness of being able to feel how we can keep ourselves from having too flat of a foot. And if this gets more and more conditioned, each step is going to be healthier and healthier and start building up that capacity, and then be able to have you walking and having that foot operate way better. This might seem a little bit daunting, especially as a visually impaired person. I get it. But with the feet activating way better, we're actually going to get a lot better proprioception and understanding of what's underneath us way faster as well. Like we talked about with the neck, if we're having these different nerve issues because muscles are not doing what they're supposed to do, kind of freaking out, then we're not going to be able to have the right feedback from our hands, or from our feet in this case, up to our brain. So the better we can make those connections by having healthy muscles on the way up, the much better off you're going to be able to be. You're going to be able to detect things underneath your feet way faster, and then also activate those muscles in order to stop if you need to, alter your course. Let's think if we're hiking and we hit just some gravel underneath us and kind of start sliding a little bit, you're going to be able to compensate way faster and have known it was happening way faster as well. So continue working on those really flat feet. I'm definitely doing that myself. I'm training for something really big right now, and I want to make sure that my flat feet aren't holding me back. So during all my exercises, I am cueing the feet first and then everything else from there. Okay, so instead of just talking your ear off about kinesiology all day, which I definitely could, I want to make you guys aware of some of the other resources that I've created with Cane Enable Fitness. First and foremost is going to be our articles, and some that come to mind are an article about 3 different exercises that are going to help your posture. You can definitely look that up on our blog. And then one that's super applicable to this, with some fixes and some other things I didn't get to talk about today, is going to be common biomechanical issues that come with visual impairment. So if you're able to look those up on our website, then and I can put them in the show notes as well, then you're going to be able to get some more information about these topics, have some deeper understanding about how you're going to be able to know when something is wrong, and then how to help yourself. Next is going to be our remote coaching. I do online coaching for people and create weekly programs that are personalized for you, your goals, your needs, what equipment you have, and then if you're visually impaired or not. I work with sighted and visually impaired people worldwide. The remote coaching could be a great option for you in order to get exactly what you need and for us to be able to progress together and make all these fun adaptations together as well. So if you or someone you know, if you think they would be able to benefit from some good one-on-one training, be able to have some consistent weekly feedback and even do video reviews and a lot of questionnaires, things like that. There's a fairly in-depth intake process for this to make sure that I have enough knowledge on you in order to make sure that we do a really great job together. That remote coaching is going to be your way to go. Next is going to be different resources that we have on social media. I tend to make a lot of different videos on a lot of different topics regarding fitness, wellness, nutrition, all of these different things, just navigating the world as a blind person, especially building different independence abilities, being able to get around Alaska being one of them right now. So those resources on our social media are definitely a good thing to look out for. And in closing, thank you so much for listening to this podcast and me rambling a little bit about some common biomechanical issues that come along with visual impairment. Of course, this is the tip of the iceberg, and it could certainly be different for you in a lot of different cases. Or you could have some other issues I wasn't able to address today, but know that there are certainly things that you can do in order to really work on those and fix them. I've been doing this with people for years and years now, and really enjoy being able to get creative, especially with all of us with visual impairments. We need things to be more tactile and more audible instead of just being shown exercises. We need to be able to feel them for ourselves and understand the process as well. So if you're interested in that, make sure to look again into our resources, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach